Hello, fabulous friends, fans, and superstars. Welcome to Synchronicity Web TV. I am your host, Nadiya Shah, and this is your moment of synchronicity. Well, I'm so excited to celebrate with you today, my dear friend, Alex TRENOWETH. Now, you've seen Alex on my channel before, without a doubt. This is probably the third or fourth time that I'm interviewing her because I love hanging out with her. And also because Alex is part of the upcoming Canadian Astrology Conference, also called the CAC. And she is going to be presenting a talk there. The whole theme of the conference this year is Earth-based wisdom. And she's got some very deep roots in that regards, indigenous roots in that regards. And so we're going to talk about that, but lots of other things as well. You're going to get to see us hang out. This is what we do when we hang out together. So Alex, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's always great to hang out with you.
It really is. And I mean, it's just the easiest thing. It's always so much fun. And I always learn something from you. And so you are going to be doing the Canadian Astrology Conference. And like I mentioned, there's a very strong, like honoring our indigenous roots type of theme that's playing out this year. And you are a perfect fit for that with your Ojibwe roots. So can you talk about that a little bit, like how you were raised in your childhood and how you understood your own indigenous roots?
Well, I was always aware of being mixed race. My father is German Scottish, and my mother is indigenous to the Saugeen Indian Reservation, which is in Ontario on Lake Huron. And so I was always aware of the fact that my parents were very different. And my mother's background, both my parents come from really big families. My mother's one of 8 children, my dad's one of 6. So I grew up surrounded by, cousins and hundreds of cousins and aunts and uncles, all very different culturally. And so I was always aware that I had this fine line to walk. And because when I went on the reservation, I wasn't quite Indian enough. And when I was at, the white school, I wasn't quite white enough, so I got kind of picked on both sides. But my mom's history is quite tragic in that her parents were victims of the residential schools. And the story is that really one day, Canadian officials came on the reservation and gathered up all the children, shoved them on buses, cut their hair. And made them speak English, and the Ojibwe culture was lost. But when I was growing up, maybe about 12 or 13, I started taking Title IV classes, which was kind of giving back our culture. So I picked up bits and pieces of the language, the crafts like beading and making moccasins and weaving, the sports and things like that I really got into. But what I treasure the most are the Ojibwe stories that I've heard, which 30 years on, I still tell my students here in London, England, these Ojibwe stories, hoping that they're going to remember the story, maybe one day tell their children if they want to have children. And that way the Ojibwe tradition lives on.
Residential schools in Canada, it was this massive tragedy that took place over many, many decades. And actually the last residential schools didn't even close until the early 90s. So there are lots of people alive today who went through that experience. And the law was at a time that simply for being indigenous or teaching your children anything about their indigenous roots was enough to have your children taken away from you. And they were put into these schools, and there was horrible things that happened there. And now Canada is sort of grappling with it, with what's being called truth and reconciliation. And so that's a movement taking place. We still have to do right by our indigenous people, that's for sure. But how wonderful that you had a chance to learn something, or at least be part of a movement that said, we are going to reclaim something that was lost. To be part of that resiliency is a very powerful thing.
Yes, it is. And in fact, I used to get really upset thinking about how my grandparents were treated. The thought of someone beating my grandmother just filled me with rage. And Ron Susskind reminded me, he says, the fact that you stand before us as an Ojibwe, still telling the stories to London school kids, says that, the Ojibwe fights on, and it's true. I just needed to hear that from him, or from anybody, actually, to say that the Ojibwe, no one successfully killed off the Ojibwe. We're still here. Bringing it to Canadian Astrology Conference, too.
That's right. You're bringing it to the Canadian Astrology Conference. I mean, if if human resiliency is on very clear display, it certainly is among the First Nations people of the Americas. And I know, being Canadian, we see that in Canada so strongly, the resilience of the human spirit, the resilience of self-knowledge that refuses to go away. And so now you are coming to the Canadian Astrology Conference, as you said, to bring those very insights, those very stories, continuing that tradition to make sure that they stay within human consciousness and human awareness. And so, what is your talk going to be about? I know it's very interesting. I'm so excited to learn about it.
I'm doing a talk on dream work, which is quite appropriate for Saturn in Pisces, which we'll talk about in a bit. But just to say that, if you've seen a dream catcher, which is like a hoop with like a spider web in it with little beads hanging off it. This is from the Ojibwe tradition. And the idea is that you put the dream catcher over a child's cradle, because when you sleep, your spirit is free to wander the earth. And the adventures that it comes across, it comes back into you in the forms of dreams. But if the dream catcher is above an infant's bed, the spirit has to go through the dream catcher to go back into the body. So therefore, all the bad dreams are caught with the morning dew and they evaporate as the sun rises. So that's how we remember our dreams. So again, mentioning Rod Susskind, who's very influential on me, obviously, he did an article for the Institute of Vedic Culture Conference in Calcutta, India, in 2018, where he was talking about how to use horary to interpret a dream. And it's a very fascinating technique, which focuses on the ninth house of the dream chart. So you elect the chart like you would do like any horary chart. You just when you receive the dream, and I think it helps to use the language. I received this dream today, and then the person's written down the dream, and then you elect a horary chart for it, and then it's standard horary terms in order to interpret the dream. So I think helping people understand what they're thinking of when they're unconscious helps to bring all these ideas and all these fears to the light, so that our conscious minds can deal with it and either compartmentalize it further or use that information to make decisions to help alleviate any stress or tensions that are present.
It's so interesting that we're talking about dreams, of course, and you mentioned Saturn in Pisces. And I have found that a lot of places, like a lot of different traditions and cultures, and even just among the collective, more people are talking about dreams than ever before. At least that's what I'm noticing. And so, how interesting that you're bringing your own tradition's perspective on dreams. How do you understand Saturn in Pisces in light of this workshop that you'll be presenting?
Well, I mean, I think even just looking at the key words, Saturn and Pisces, you have dream works out of that. And as I said, I do think that it gives us the like little portal to understand our unconsciousness and bring these things to the light so that we can work on them. One of the things I advise clients or just general is, to honor the place where you dream, which is your bed. So make your bed every morning. Make sure that your sheets are clean. Make sure your pajamas are clean. Make sure that you are clean when you get into your bed. That way, you're going to have a good night's sleep. You're not hungry, you're not thirsty or whatever. Everything that you need has been taken care of, and therefore you can honor your sleep and encourage the dreams to come out. The other thing is, some people enjoy writing, but other people find that just a quick recording with their mobile phone of their dream really helps jog their memory. And so when they pass on their dream, they write it out for the astrologer to interpret. More details can come out. And so when I get this description of a dream, and it's only very often only a paragraph or two, is I look for the themes in there, and they're usually very easy to find, and they almost always correlate to the relevant houses that they belong to. But as I said, working with dreams is all a part of Saturn in Pisces, and I think Saturn in Pisces, if you have Saturn in Pisces natally, if you're nearing 60 or nearing 30 or nearing 90, you are happy to paddle along on the shores and get your feet wet, but to really get you get your hair wet. You have to either be rescuing somebody who's in trouble, or you have to be the one who's fallen in and needs to be rescued. There's a choice there with Saturn and Pisces. Being a mutable sign, there's often two very distinct directions that you can take with Saturn and Pisces. So I just think that this is a great time to focus on what, our body or what our neurology is telling us, and to work with that and find a meaning for it and do something about it. Which is the other part of working, is you're not just planning, you're doing.
Yeah, because Saturn is about the work. It's grounded, it's practical, but the energy of Pisces is about dreams. And so doing that dream work, how perfectly symbolic with Saturn in Pisces. Now, outside of just dream work, let's talk about Saturn in Pisces for the collective in general, if that's okay, because this is a fascinating energy. It isn't just about what's happening in the dream space, of course, but as you were talking about dream work, I was also thinking about how people have dreams for their lives, right? They have fantasies of what's possible. Now, living it, embodying it, making that come together is a powerful theme as well for the collective over the course of this transit.
Yeah, and you touched on something really important too, and that is a touch of reality to your fantasy. Is it really a fantasy, or is it something doable in your lifetime? And I think, when you reach, your Saturn returns at around 30, 60, or 90, you maybe the half Saturn returns as well. You're thinking about the things that maybe you need to let go of. Otherwise, it's just going to bring you down. Habits that aren't working for you anymore. Addictions that you need to be honest about, which are always really hard to be honest about. And, just having a really clear look at your life, I think. And with Saturn in Pisces, I think the reality is very clouded, and it's really hard to see what's right in front of you, and therefore you need your unconscious. It's like you have to trust your intuition to get you through the murk, to get you through to the other side, to get you to safety.
And very often what gets us there is taking some action. How do you feel about, and what do you think about, you know, Pisces can be an energy that is so emotional and energetic that the Saturnian energy can almost feel like it is in contrast to Piscean energy. Um, how do you reconcile that? How do you bring them together at a time like this when we're going through this collective transit?
Okay, so if we use the metaphor of trying to build a sandcastle in high tide, okay, so eventually Saturn wants to work, and Saturn in Pisces has to do a lot of work in building structure. So they're going to figure out very quickly, okay, building a sandcastle in high tide isn't a great idea. Can I move up where the sand is a bit firmer? But then you find out that the sun maybe dries up the sand. So it's all about finding the right material, I think, with Saturn and Pisces, which often takes them a long time to realize, it's a bit easier being organized than just letting things, fall into whatever place I think they should be. So a little bit about embracing the opposite sign and some of that Virgo energy, and, having a clear routine, a clear schedule, looking after your body, because, no one else can look after your body but you. And, stepping up and taking responsibility, that's big Saturn word for Saturn and Pisces, not let things gloss over. Getting in there and grabbing things as hard as you can, and doing something with that frustration or that disorganization, getting it under control and keeping it under control, I think is what Saturn, the challenge of Saturn and Pisces.
I know you're an avid bodybuilder. And so, how do you see
Ah.
that in relation to Saturn and Pisces?
Well, I've always had trouble keeping my weight down. And I found that the things that didn't work were the running and the cycling and the cross trainer. I just found that the endless cardio, even if I try to do HIIT cardio, it just didn't really do much to keep my weight down. The only thing that kept my weight down is lifting weights and building muscle. So I've been a bodybuilder since my university days. And while I do put on weight, I'm also very muscular underneath. So if I slack off, I can get back into the gym and lift weights. But I think Saturn and Pisces, for me, it does so many things for me. First well, it forces me to have a routine that works for me. I mean, it is hard to work in an hour at the gym if you have to think about if I go before work, I got to pack my gym kit. You know, if I go after work, I still got to pack my gym kit. It takes up time, and then you got to worry about food because as a bodybuilder, you're soon going to know if you go, for a couple hours without food because your belly starts howling. And every couple hours you got to eat, and you got to eat the right types of food. So again, more of that organization that involves packing a lunch and a snack and everything else in that gym kit. So you know, having a bodybuilding regime really does force a person to consider the practical things around. And I would say to anybody who wants to pick up any sort of artistic endeavor or that wants to learn new craft or something, it's the same thing. You have to consider how much time you have taking things out and putting them away and creating a routine. So, Saturn in Pisces is all about finding the pulse of that routine, which can be very challenging for anybody, let alone Saturn in Pisces.
Do you associate Pisces with film and Hollywood at all? Like, do you think there's any relevance there? Because I know a lot of us as astrologers have been speaking about the fact that Saturn and Pisces may bring about some changes to Hollywood and things. And one of the things that really comes forward that I find so fascinating, of course, is right now there's like this huge actor strike taking place. It started first with a writer's strike. And so basically, Hollywood is shut down. It is restricted, put it that way. It is majorly restricted right now with Saturn and Pisces. It's so interesting to see how these things tend to manifest. But how have you been making those correlations as well with Hollywood and filmmaking and Saturn being in the sign of La La Land, as they call it, right?
Well, I got a bit of a head start in that I wrote a book about astrology and films. So it's called Mirror Mirror. It's about biopics, so films about real people. So, for example, Elton John was played by Taron Egerton in Rocketman. So, over the pandemic, just before Saturn moved into Pisces, I was working on this book, and it came out a couple of years ago. But yeah, I totally see what you're getting at in terms of how films are going to change. But look at Barbenheimer. Barbie and Oppenheimer. I mean, because they paired together these two incongruous films together, suddenly became this internet phenomenon that, of course, I had to sit through, just to say that I had done it. And I wrote an article for the Astrological Journal as well on the astrology of Barbenheimer. But yeah, I mean, these old organizations and old societies, I think, need to collapse. Look at the scandal involved with Hollywood. Look at how they treated Judy Garland, and just go back and look at all the Shirley Temple, how they treated these, young women in the industry, and they go through all the other controversies that have been going on recently. So something has to change in there. So going back to Pisces, we think that rocks and mountains are so firm. Well, they're nothing really compared to the pressure and of water. Water can eventually erode that mountain and leave with no choice but to rebuild. And so while it's true that the sandcastle can't withstand a high tide, neither can a mountain withstand a good pounding by a hurricane or whatever.
And as much as we have that thriving, like I think the like with Barbenheimer, what we've seen is just how valuable that industry is to people culturally, certainly, personally as well. Stories, as we began talking about stories as we began our conversation, they have a way of speaking to our hopes and our wishes. And they also have a way of telling us who we are and telling us who we can be and acting as a healing balm in our life as well. They can do all that and so much more. And how necessary that is as part of our collective human need on a level of spirit, on a level of psyche. It's very powerful to consider. I love that you were talking earlier about working with dreams, because it is, of course, with Hollywood itself that talks about how it's dreamland, and it is in its own way working with dreams. It's taking something that was just a hope or a wish and manifesting it into a work of art. And in a way, it is our dreams as well that take something that is so ephemeral and ethereal, and finding a way to describe it, to put it into language, to understand what it actually means for us as part of our soul's growth. All of these together tend to be so strongly correlated with that Saturn and Pisces symbol. Now, do you associate Pisces at all with things like healing and medicine? Have you had any thoughts around that with Saturn in Pisces?
Well, yes, of course. It is to do with, I hope, we are very careful about what we agreed to as a profession, and who we want to be associated with, because there are people out there, of course, who are sending off invitations for readings and stuff like that using somebody else's name. So we need to be careful, I think, about who we get involved with. But thinking about regulating astrology as a society, as a group, who's a real astrologer? What kind of qualifications do you need before you can call yourself a real astrologer? I mean, these are all really intriguing questions that I think that have been raised already. But as we're coming back to live conferences, things that aren't likely to be resolved, anytime soon. These are things to be talked about and brought out into the open. And maybe people do need to spend some time in the ninth house meditating or thinking about their next steps, or considering the future of astrology. And I think that can go for any healing art as well, not just astrology, but Reiki, for example, acupuncture, although any massage, any healing art that you can think of, I think need to
Wow.
consider the rules and regulations.
Yeah, to take the more active, engaged principle of the ninth house and the energy of Sagittarius, but also to understand by using that the more Piscean expression of Jupiterian energy, because Saturn is in the sign of Pisces, to understand the surrender of Pisces, to be active with understanding where it is that this will is going in terms of our understanding, at least the balance of understanding between what is our work to do and where is the work to just surrender and accept, whether that has to do with personal healing, or whether that has to do with our understanding of who we are as astrologers as well. What is that going to mean going forward from here? Very powerful considerations to have.
As you were talking, I remembered a little story just to further demonstrate Saturn in Pisces. I'm not sure if to call it a joke, a story, something apocryphal. I'm not sure if it really happened. But Michelangelo and a friend were staring at a great big block of marble. And Michelangelo was walking around, looking at this thing, walking all around, looking at it from below, trying to get a feel for this marble block. And his friend said, what are you going to do with it? How do you make your plan? And Michelangelo said, I see the angel within. It's my job to release her. So I
So
think, Saturn Pisces is the inspiration and the belief that you're setting something free, to do good work, to do bad work. It depends on what your inspiration is, but
wow, you're doing the work to set something free. Could be something beautiful, it could be something idyllic, or it could be something that is not necessarily motivated from that place or has an outcome rooted in that place. And yet it is the work that we're doing to create that sense of expression. Very powerful to consider. Well, Alex, I absolutely adore you. Once again, you guys, it is going to be Alex Trenoweth, celebrated astrologer, who is going to be in Calgary, Alberta, as part of the Canadian Astrology Conference. And you can join us live in person the weekend of September 15th, or you can join us online as well. So there's lots of ways in which to tap into the wisdom of Alex and what she is going to be presenting live in Calgary, Alberta. Alex, I adore you. I love this conversation that we just had. Yeah, related to just like to get us thinking about the power of Saturn in Pisces and how it's already speaking to us. And we're really in the first part of the larger journey. We are going to be feeling this energy right into 2026. We're going to feel this energy. And so it'll be really interesting to see how it continues to unfold. And also, thanks to your talk, the work that dreams require. the work that dreams require. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you very much, Nadiya. Always good to see you.
Always.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you, everybody out there, for watching. Until we connect again, take care. Bye.